Too many neurodivergent kids hit a breaking point by the time they reach middle school.
When we focus on the deficits or behaviors that need to be fixed or managed, we risk missing what the child can really do.
A strength-based school would offer flexibility, meaningful choices, not just the illusion of choice, but real, empowering options.
What is neurodiversity? What makes the practice neuroaffirming? Join us at the Neurodiversity MENA podcast, where we'll share the answers to all your neurodiversity questions. Whether you're navigating neurodiversity yourself, advocating for a loved one, or looking to make your practice more neuroaffirming, or just curious to learn more, this podcast is for you. Let's shape a world where all brains can thrive.
In today's episode, we continue the conversation about strength-based neuroaffirming approaches. Today we have myself, Kehdy, she, her, joining me, Shija Sapru, and another member of our podcast team, Piya Jayarajan. Welcome to Neurodiversity MENA podcast. So in the previous episode, we were discussing the challenges that neurodivergent students face in schools in terms of performative requirements. Grading, testing, and assessment, they're all rigid and so deficit-based. Most often, in school, the kids get assessed on what they cannot do, rather than focusing on their strengths and abilities and building on them. And this age-bound curriculum and these standardized tests favor linear progress, leaving behind many students who can process information differently. Teachers, students, and everyone in the school is so busy and caught up preparing for these assessment and evaluations. And without, trying to understand or without trying to understand or use the prerequisite skills needed for each subject that the student is tested for. If a child, for example, struggles with reading, memorization, with handwriting, anything, they will be labeled as behind, or they will be labeled, oh, this child needs intervention, rather than recognizing what the child can really do and how they can maybe learn, or they have a different learning style. So basically, all the abilities like creative thinking, problem solving, pattern recognition, they are, or hyper-focus, because many neurodivergent students have all these strengths. All these are rarely measured, and most often they're overlooked. How about you tell us, Piya, more about the emotional impact of all this?
Of course, Karen, the impact is evident. I see so many anxious parents and students lately. And the main reasons being that these standardized assessments are based on neuronormative and grade level standards, resulting in low self-esteem, anxiety, and disengagement from learning. And not just that, it's really sad that many neurodivergent students actually begin to internalize the belief that they are not good enough or they are not capable, simply because their strengths are not measured in this traditional approach. And most schools look at strengths from an academic perspective or from a curriculum-based level. And if a child's strength falls out of this prescribed curriculum or grade level, it's simply not acknowledged. And this naturally leads to masking, burnout, and even school refusal, as these students feel unsupported and unheard. And this definitely needs to be addressed.
But Karen, aren't accommodations and modifications available to children?
Yes, Shija, while accommodations and modifications do exist to an extent, there are limitations, and especially when it comes to standardized assessments and testing. So the teachers and the inclusion staff can provide supports, maybe like extended time or quiet environments, calming environments for the students. But for students who process information differently or have a different learning style, these accommodations may not be enough. These students often need the whole content of the test to be modified, not just the conditions under which the test is taken. So it's important here to remember that accommodations change the how students access learning, but modifications change what is expected or what the students are expected to learn. Standardized tests typically allow for accommodations more than modifications. And I think it's rarely done any modifications for these standardized tests, which puts some learners at a disadvantage here. Even with a grade level classroom, children are at varying levels of math, for example. So a standardized math test cannot cater to all the different learning and different cognitive styles.
Yes, most neurodivergent students who have a formal diagnosis are currently receiving accommodations and modifications through their individualized educational plans, or popularly known as IEPs. While this system supports many students effectively, it also highlights a significant gap because students without formal diagnosis, such as undiagnosed neurodivergent students, neurotypical students who are facing academic, social, and emotional challenges, don't have access to this kind of support. And this raises a very important question. Why are accommodations primarily reserved only for those with a documented diagnosis? Why can't they be made universally available for all students in a classroom? This current approach actually creates a barrier to access, if you ask me, particularly for students who may be struggling silently. And nobody really considers the various obstacles to actually getting a diagnosis. It's not that easy. There could be financial, cultural, or logistical barriers. What are your thoughts on this, Karen?
Sometimes, a child's needs don't fit neatly into a diagnostic criteria. And in many neurotypical students, they can also benefit from a lot of flexible learning support and accommodations, which is impossible under the existing policies. I think we also need here to highlight that accommodations and modifications, even if made available to everyone, like to neurotypical and neurodivergent students, with or without diagnosis, they're not equivalent to a strength-based education.
You're right, Karen. In fact, there are many parents doing a strength-based education by focusing just on the strengths and interests only, but thinking that the challenges will get resolved as they get older. Now, this is most often a gamble, I would say. There is no doubt that a strength-based approach is an effective method for supporting neurodivergent individuals because by all means, it focuses on identifying the individual strengths, which helps meaningful progress, facilitating meaningful progress in that individual. But overlooking those challenges in the hope that these challenges might improve, we're actually denying that individual the opportunity to explore strategies. And that could actually complement the strength-based approach, in fact. So it is true that this might require the support of therapists or special educators, in addition to the class teacher or the tutor, because they can provide more nuanced and very focused strategies, which could be incorporated into the strength-based approaches. Now, this dual focus of addressing both strengths and challenges, but in a specialized and individualized manner, empowers these neurodivergent individuals by providing them the tools to navigate their challenges or difficulties while simultaneously capitalizing on their strengths.
Yes, Shija, and I totally agree with the dual focus approach. I know many might not resonate with it, but I think supporting challenges is as important as focusing on the strength. To illustrate this, to just give an example, let's consider a student who has APT, which is auditory processing disorder. Now, what's APT? So the auditory processing disorder is definitely not a hearing issue. So the student can hear perfectly well here, but it's rather a difficulty in processing the spoken language. So the brain struggles to interpret and process the words and make sense of what is heard, which can directly affect the language, the following instruction, engagement, comprehension, and everything, pertaining to the language. So without targeted support, such as, auditory hearing programs, therapies, strategies to support this, the student might find it really, really hard and difficult to access learning. So even in subjects that he's really interested in. So the issue here, it's not the lack of intrinsic motivation or the lack of focus or the ability, but the absence of tools that can help, bridge this gap in the processing. By addressing these underlying challenges, we create the essential bridge to a strength-based model, strength-based approach. Parents, educators, therapists will still have to work, obviously, on individualized plans, individualized educational plan or individualized therapy plans to incorporate the child's strengths, talents, and passions in every lessons. So to support the current challenges.
Exactly. Speaking of strength-based approaches, we also need to discuss a strength-based IEP. Now, a formal definition of a strength-based IEP is one that acknowledges and utilizes a student's natural talent, interests, and preferences to guide the development of goals, accommodations, and support strategies. In simpler words, a strength-based IEP actually shifts the focus from a student's weakness or deficits to their strength by recognizing that they learn best when we build on from what they're already good at or what they already know. Now, let's take an IEP goal, for example, that focuses on enhancing a child's social emotional skills in a classroom. Now, if this child enjoys painting and is passionate about art, he or she can be encouraged to use this talent and creativity to express their feelings, volunteer for art-related projects, participate in collaborative art activities with peers, and so on. So, if you notice, you're actually building on what a child is already good at or he or she is passionate about, thereby enhancing his social emotional learning. To summarize, in a strength-based model, one has to set up a system or a village comprising of teachers, therapists, coaches, or mentors who recognize and celebrate your child's unique special interests and strengths. Engage the child in more activities where he or she has the opportunity to explore their areas of interest or passion, but with no expectations, simply to boost their self-confidence and to empower them. And use scaffolding for others where they may face difficulties in succeeding by using a specialized or an individualized approach.
Unfortunately, Piya, the strength-based approach remains largely absent in both mainstream and special education settings. Instead, many schools continue to rely heavily on discipline, behaviorism, compliance, and place emphasis on the performative outcomes. Tests, assessment, evaluation, standardized test scores, compliance with the rules, observable behaviors, rather than understanding and nurturing each child's unique abilities. In these environments, success is often measured and defined by a student's ability to meet predetermined benchmarks, which are basically neuromajority or neuronormative benchmarks, and conform to the expected behaviors rather than their individual growth, their individual creativity, their intrinsic motivation and strength. So this approach can be particularly limiting and even harmful for many neurodivergent students whose potential may not be immediately visible through conventional methods or behavioral metrics. What's often overlooked is that every child, regardless of the diagnosis or label or his cognitive style, brings a unique set of strengths, talents, interests, ways of learning. When we focus on the deficits or behaviors that need to be fixed or managed, we risk missing what the child can really do and what they can excel at and how they can best engage with the world around them.
We also need to emphasize here that the existing approach kind of limits the number of neurodivergent children in a classroom too. But by incorporating a neuroaffirmative and strength-based approach, we can cater to more neurodivergent students, as the emphasis is on strengths, interests, and passions, which is embraced a lot more than the focus on the deficits.
The existing schools also here have inclusion departments, but these inclusion departments are limited in scope. Like we mentioned in the previous episode, supporting neurodivergent children should be a holistic approach and not just, allocated to one inclusion department. And this can happen only through regular neurodiversity awareness and training sessions, awareness of the overlap of different neurotypes, understanding how all the adults, not only teachers or the SEN teachers, people working in the inclusion department, Everyone can and should be neuroaffirming. Understanding also what neuroaffirming strength-based approaches are. We want to acknowledge here that our teachers and inclusion staff are doing their very best within the knowledge and the limited resources that they have. So we're not blaming anyone here. We're not placing the blame on individuals because we recognize that this is not a teacher's issue. It's a systemic issue. And it's the entire system that needs meaningful reform. However, schools could start working towards strength-based approaches within the limited opportunities of the curriculum, performative expectations, rigid system, provided that the leadership team, teachers, head of inclusion, all the inclusion department, they all, along with the parents of course, work collaboratively towards the goal. Now let's give an example here. For example, there's a Year 5 English teacher. So this Year 5 English teacher aims to incorporate specific themes in her lessons. And this theme, it reflects the students' interests. However, the head of the department, they have a different agenda or a different unit of inquiry, just like, all IB schools in UAE, they have unit of inquiries. So here, this can create a disconnect. So for a cohesive and effective learning experience, it's really essential and important that everyone, all the team members, all the teachers are on board. They work collaboratively toward a common goal.
Now let's all imagine a neuro-affirming, strength-based approach school. What if, instead of focusing mostly on what kids struggle with or how well they meet grade level standards, we begin with this question: what does this child do well? And what lights them up? Now, rethinking education through that lens changes everything. It means we focus on what a child can do while supporting the areas that they face challenges in. Now, we are not ignoring the hard stuff. We are just not letting those challenges define the child. A strength-based school would offer flexibility, meaningful choices, not just the illusion of choice, but real, empowering options that let students have a say in how they learn, what they learn, how they show their understanding. And that kind of agency builds confidence. It gives students a sense of psychological safety, the feeling that they can take risks, make mistakes, and still be accepted for who they are. So instead of sticking rigidly to grade level expectations or a one-size-fits-all curriculum, this approach makes room for individualized pathways. Now, it's about recognizing that neurodivergent kids, they grow at different rates, and their strengths don't always show up in traditional academic setting.
Very true. And here I'd like to add that we can also use students' interests as a bridge to help them work towards their challenges. In fact, when learning feels relevant and purposeful, and when it's tied to something a child truly cares about, they're more likely to stay engaged, push through their frustrations, and feel proud of their progress.
Another big piece here is collaboration, not just between the teachers and students, but between the students themselves. Now imagine a school where neurodivergent individuals, students, they have the opportunity to team up with mentors. Now those mentors can be older students, older peers, even adults who share their interests or have walked a similar path. See, that kind of connection can be life-changing. Now some schools are starting to take small steps in this direction. But for neurodivergent students, these kinds of support can't just be on an occasional add-up. It has to be more consistent. So they need to be part of everyday education, not just an add-on. So consistency here is the key.
The truth is, too many neurodivergent kids hit a breaking point by the time they reach middle school. Others might make it through all the 12 years, but they come out on the other side feeling lost, like they were never truly seen or heard. Shija, why do you think that happens?
Often it's because they never had an access to learning or an education model that honored their strengths or even gave them real choices. Now, they were often told how to learn, what to learn, how fast to learn, even without a room to explore who they are. But it doesn't have to be that way, isn't it?
Yes, and this is why we really need alternative options in addition to the existing settings that we have, mainstream and special schools, because many students do not fit into either of these options. Now, we don't want to force fit our neurodivergent children into the existing mainstream or special schools just because there are no other available options. Now, some of our listeners will wonder, what do we mean here by an alternative option? Does it mean a special school or a vocational center? What we mean here by alternative option is a different setup. It's not a mainstream nor a special school. Alternative schools usually have enough flexibility to incorporate what the child loves doing. There's no need to comply with one particular curriculum here. You can choose from different varied options in learning that work for the individual. And this will allow for a variety of learning pathways that can recognize what the child can do best or what they can excel at, and that focus on their strengths, interests, and talents. This model has a more individualized and tailored approach to learning more than the current model that we have right now, which is unfortunately a one-size-fits-all model.
Yes, and it's about time that we move away from a one-size-fits-all model. Now let's talk about entry into colleges and universities. I think we can all agree that using these test scores are in no way neuroaffirming or strength-based to evaluate a student. These scores simply represent a student's performance during a specific time frame, including time extensions or any accommodations that he or she may have received. And they don't really give an accurate picture of their abilities or potential actually. So instead of relying solely on numerical test scores, institutions of higher education can actually prioritize a holistic review process where they consider work samples like summer internships, projects, portfolios, or any other tangible evidence of a student's skills and interests related to their chosen field of study. This method would actually give a more comprehensive picture of a candidate's unique strengths and interests. And by all means, this is a more inclusive admission process whereby you're actually embracing diverse cognitive styles and learning experiences.
Now that we have discussed higher education, what about workplaces, Shija? Why do you think it's really important to build neuro-inclusive environments at workplaces?
So this strength-based approach that we have been discussing all this while at education and colleges or higher education, this can happen at workplaces too. It actually helps boost the productivity at the organization and satisfaction among employees too. Because the entire process, right from the job description, you could define the job role according to the strengths that would be beneficial to that role, explaining the best environments that would be available within the workspaces. The interview questions can be shared ahead of time, sharing work samples to know the capabilities of that individual. Now, this will help in the application decision process too. Alternatively, organizations can also attract people who are a better fit. A complete win-win, I would say. As we explained earlier today, there's an excessive emphasis on curriculum, giving them limited opportunities to dive into their areas of strengths and interest. But this actually lacks the bigger picture or the long-term goals during the school years. Now, the impact of this happens at the workplaces because many neurodivergent individuals who get hired through neurodiversity hiring programs, most often they do not have the skills to thrive in workplaces. And this becomes a challenge both to the individual and the workplace as well. And for those who do not disclose their neurodivergence or are not even aware of it, now they face even more challenging consequences affecting their mental health.
So when it comes to workplaces, there are two important questions that we need to ask. How can environments be redesigned to support the individual by incorporating their strengths into the job role? And how can this pave way for more autonomy within the job role actually? So, one powerful approach that I can think of is where you allow the employee himself or herself to shape the aspect of their role to better align with their strengths and interests. Of course, this does not mean that you change the core goals of the job, you only adjust the how to or the process, so you're actually setting the individual up for success. When people are encouraged to bring their authentic selves to work and contribute in ways that matter to them, they're far more intrinsically motivated to excel in the job. For example, let's take a neurodivergent employee who works best in focused bursts of time rather than long uninterrupted stretches. Now, their schedules can actually be adjusted to include shorter and more intense work periods with frequent breaks so that they stay engaged and productive. They might also be encouraged to work in quieter spaces or use noise cancelling headphones or whatever tools that they want so that they are able to drown out any distractions. And they should also be allowed to choose communication methods that work best for them, like written updates, text messages instead of these back-to-back meetings. In short, when we create workplaces where individual strengths are valued, we enable employees to thrive.
Also, for some neurodivergent employees, the traditional office culture, like frequent small talks, unstructured meetings, or like Piya said, back-to-back meetings, networking events, they can be a significant source of stress. So setting clear meeting agendas, allowing for different forms of communication, or creating predictable routines might really help. For example here, let's say a neurodivergent employee might choose to engage with his colleagues through emails or written channels like email or any other written channel, rather than the in-person office meetings. So allowing this for a better processing time, because through emails we have more processing time and it has like less chances that we will be anxious while writing an email. Or say let an employee who has sensory sensitivity, whether it's auditory sensitivities, whether it's visual. So the typical open space office is overstimulating and it can be really overwhelming. Providing noise cancelling headphones, flexible lighting, or even remote work options, or access to quieter spaces in the office can really help. So these are small shifts, but they can make a huge difference in productivity and the overall well-being of the employee.
As we wrap up Series 1 of Neurodiversity MENA podcast, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts in joining us in this journey. The team of Neurodiversity MENA podcast, which includes the 7 of us who have been through very different paths, but we align in the mission of understanding neurodiversity, shifting the lens to be neuroaffirming, and embracing strength-based approaches. Now, this podcast was created in the hope of encouraging reflection, challenging existing systems, and inspiring meaningful change in how we support neurodivergent individuals in education, in workplace, and beyond. So, as neurodiversity advocates, activists, and parents, we cannot bring about systemic change on our own. We understand that the topics that we discuss in this podcast requires a paradigm shift to the existing systems, whether in schools, therapy centers, workplaces, or communities. But we recognize the powerful impact that this change could bring about. So, we are extending an open invitation to educators, policymakers, healthcare professionals, parents, employers, all key stakeholders who are in a position to influence real change. So if you are committed to building systems that truly reflect the diverse ways in which people think, learn, and interact with the world, we want to hear from you. And the UAE has been transformative in many ways, which we all are so proud of, bringing about significant changes in a remarkably short span of time. We hope that the UAE can serve as a model for the change that we discuss in our podcast, so that the rest of the world can follow suit. Therefore, we hope that change makers will listen to our podcast as we are here to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Shija. And with that wonderful message, we come to the end of our discussion and we really hope you enjoyed it. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We look forward to your rating and review. For more details, you can log on to our website www.neurodiversitymena.com. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and all the usual socials. We'll see you next time. Thank you.